Hello everyone, here's the Mad Bart. Welcome to an episode of Wild Reading. Today we're going to talk about a painful book because the genre is dark academia and we're talking about Babel for R. F. Kuang. It's my first book to read in dark academia as a genre, and as a speaker of a different language because my mother tongue is not English, I really found the book interesting in terms of language, characters and storyline in general. Now for the first part, let's talk about the story itself. Here we have Robin. He's a person who's born in Canton in China, and he lives a miserable life because he's an orphan. Then someone comes like an angel coming to another land to take him from his miserable life to go to England to have the life of angels. So there is a kind of contrast in this story, by the way, and I will talk about this in a minute. There he learns to be a translator, and he actually kind of believed that all of his life led him to this. And by the way, this kind of a creepy life for him because his life in China, when he was raised there, he was raised as an English boy living a miserable life in China. And when he went to England, he found that everything that happened in his life was actually there to get him ready to his life in England. And that man, the professor, actually wanted him to become a translator, and he actually wrote the recommendation letter for him to go into Oxford for Babel, which is the Center for Translation. So everything has been planned out for this orphan, but he wants to know why. He wants to know how this came to be, by the way. Then he discovers that his translations and studying in Oxford is not for free, and what he has to do is just to contribute in the translations of Chinese texts in order to use them as engravings on pieces of silver in order to use that energy to run the country. But the kind of idea is they take that silver and they take the natural resource from the other kingdoms and countries that England controls. So it's kind of strange. Now, going back to this idea of living in China and coming back to England, which kind of, they actually planned it for him and for the other people, by the way, to go to Oxford, especially if they are from other languages like Arabic, French or whatever, or from countries where there is a shortage of translators between this language and the mother tongue of these people. They create a kind of infidelity for that country, like the difference between heaven and hell. Like this kind of idea where your own homeland is hell and an angel comes to take you out to heaven, which is England. So that way you have no sense of belonging to your own homeland, while you give your own fidelity and loyalty to England. So you start working there as a translator and you never care if what you're doing is going to hurt the people at your homeland, because now they're not your own people and it's not your own country. Students in general, when they find out what is the real job of the people in Babel and how it is used to build England and destroy the other lands or the other countries around it and keep England in control, some people would actually take one of two choices. The first choice is to go with the flow, go with the safe choice, enjoy your happy life, and you're no longer loyal to that country, you are loyal to England. And they turn out to become professors and they help in that kind of scheme. Or the other point of view is that you don't accept what's happening. And here comes the dangerous part, because Robin didn't accept what happened. And he started actually discovering things by his own intellect about what's going on, because people who work in translation, they get smarter and smarter, they read a lot of texts and they discover the reality of what's going on. So You can't stand by and let that happen. And that happened with our friend here, Robin. He wanted to make a difference. And also he wanted to see if what he thought that England is doing is wrong or not. So at that time, he gets invited to a secret society where actually people going against Babel and want to uncover all the people who live in England and in the world, the atrocities England is committing, using Babel as a center for translation as a tool taken from other countries. So the idea itself is really dark because you're actually going against the country. In this case, characters are really well studied because Arif Kuang herself is a Chinese who live in England, and she knows this kind of experience and she uses characteristics in different people. So I think she actually met a lot of people from different races and countries, so she knows exactly what she's talking about. Like the countries, let's say I am a speaker of Arabic, so I know something, I know Islam and I know the characters that she might bring, and I think she's so accurate when it comes to the characters and her choice of characters and how they talk and how they behave. So there is a kind of well-studied, well-rounded characters. But the point is, why did she actually choose them from these countries? Now we know she chose Robin from China because she's Chinese and she knows more about that type of experience. But what about France? What about India? What about the other countries in general? Well, there is kind of, she knows more only about these? No, she actually knows more, but since they have the characteristics or that are needed exactly to overcome this kind of problem or to face it in general, maybe they have the certain bravery or they are the ones who should break the cycle of this slavery. Like I can call it a certain type of slavery and at the same time a type of war where it's already controlled by the strong, which is England. The language in this book, by the way, is really interesting because not anyone who knows English can read the book. It needs someone who is professional at reading, knows English in a really high level. I'm talking for those who actually study English language, because this book, by the way, can affect or the learners of language more than the people who live in England or native speakers. Because you might read about your own history, you might read about what happened, and you can connect it with what happened 100 or 200 years ago, or maybe you can connect it with at the time when England was on the pinnacle of the world and it was controlling the world, the British Empire, and you can actually know what happened in history and what's actually in the story here, and you can make a kind of comparison. But the idea of another perspective, which is kind of hatred and at the same time anger about the idea if this was real or not, because we might be actually used like Robin was used. Situation in our countries, the bad situation that a lot of the countries in the world reach to, might be because of England or might be because of the leading power at that time. But specifically in this novel, it was about England. So it's kind of, you have to know about that, and you have to know the importance of your country and the importance of what England did to you, and why is English important or why the other languages are important. There is the power of translation over here when it comes to, and she knew how to express all of that using precise language. She is a person who used actually some words that were new to me, and I was happy actually to read that book because it made me actually develop as a reader, and it gave me a kind of mentality to see things from another point of view, not, let's say, the dark half of the moon, let's call it, of every story here, because you're seeing some feelings that you would never experience in another type of book. And that's why I liked grim, dark, and dark academia. But this kind of experience with the language is she knew how to use the words not only to describe their own characters and what happens, but also the right words to irritate you, the right words to provoke you to read more, because you want to know what does she want with all of that. Especially that you know that the story itself is really going in a very dark road. Like the end of the road is not good. So what actually wants you to read, the language is so nice, but at the same time, the experience of reading the book as language and as an experience, you know that she put a lot of feelings in that. And this reminds me, by the way, of Wuthering Heights. Like by finishing reading Wuthering Heights, you get a certain feeling of pressure, of the hatred that's in the book, of the grim dark feeling in there is really evident. It's not about that she hates a certain side and prefers a certain side, as countries or good or evil. No, it's kind of the whole world is dark in this case. And when you finish reading the book, it's kind of like a monster eating at your soul. And once you're done with the book, oh, you're done with all the bad feelings in the world. Now, why did she actually write that book? It's something interesting. So I can actually watch some of her interviews to know why. But it's kind of, she went into a place where I think no one else went there, especially that those who know something like this might not have the ability to write in English a really well written book like Babel. And by the way, as a speaker of Arabic, when I actually read the title Babel, I wanted to know, what does Babel, which is Babylon in Iraq, what does it have to do with Babel over here? And although if it's not related, I would like to know more about why did she write Babel as a title. And by the way, if you know more about why did she choose the title Babel, I would actually be happy if you write that down so I can know, because I didn't find any connection between Babel in Iraq, which is Babylon, and Babel as a book, which is the tower. The only thing that is the Tower of Babel that was back in history in Babylon really a center for knowledge, because I'd like to talk about this. Babylon, which is Babel in Iraq, and this novel itself, because Babylon, if you say that center of education, translation, knowledge, it was Iraq, by the way, for a very long time, especially at the time of Babylon, because Babylon is one of the cities, we call them the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the world. But the real first one of the 7 wonders of the world was the Tower of Babel. Now the idea is this: the Tower of Babylon wasn't actually built just for the king over there to go see the god, because that's not what we were looking for. There is a center for knowledge, because at that time there was knowledge. And maybe the Tower of Babylon actually had sections and knowledge and studying and alchemy and all of that. And I might think that our author, Kuang, took the idea from that. She might be imagined that or read something about history that told her that back in the time in Babylon, the center of knowledge of the world, especially that one of the people or 2 of the people who actually ruled the world lived in Babylon. So as Babylon became the center of power and the center of translation, is she saying in this book that England or London in particular, or Oxford, where the place is, because she put a map of Oxford with the place for Babel as a tower for translation or center for translation, is Oxford another attempt to create Babylon? Did she actually get to a certain secret about Babylon, and she's going to repeat that over here, that the secret has to do with knowledge? So it's kind of the discussion, it's very wide topic between England, Babylon, and what's going on. Maybe she has the topic of history repeats itself, but at the end there is a type of cycle that needs to be broken, and this time Robin really broke it. You would feel, by the way, that the end is really dark, but at the same time it's logical. We don't get to have a happy ending, we solved everything, everything is finished, we're good, we gave it, let's say, we actually gave everyone what it needs. No, it's kind of, it's not a happy ending in the sense that you feel it, but at the same time it's not a satisfying ending. So you're chasing a certain ending with this, but it turns out that there is no solution, because, by the way, if she gave it a solution, she would be lying to us. That's what I feel. This kind of feeling, if she told us really that Robin succeeded in destroying England and destroying Oxford, then she would be going overboard. But the kind of end that we get is seriously interesting, but at the same time, like, actually, I remember I felt annoyed for about 2 to 3 days after reading the book. Like, kind of all the life that I had amounts nothing in front of the book, because it makes me think that everything I actually felt annoyed from is silly in comparison to the real experience this person had, even though it's a character she wrote about. But she made you believe really that he's a live character, because the amount of fantasy in this book is minimum. So you feel that if you get through an experience close to that, would you actually be as brave as Robin, knowing that your end is not gonna be good? Now that's kind of interesting. I would like to ask you to tell me what part of that book can be connected to reality and what part of it is really, let's say, did really happen. And why do you think R.F. Kuang chose Babel as the title? And is she going to write something else about that? Or is it just a feeling that was in her heart, an idea that was in her mind, and she just expressed it in that book and said, I'm done with this? Like, if she got this monster out of her heart, she's presenting that monster to eat our hearts also. But the certain idea that annoys every single one of us, especially those who the English is not their mother tongue, they might feel connected to the story to the point that they want to write something about the story or go search more about things like this, because for sure this is not the first time something like this happens. You would love to know exactly if your country was affected in one way, or if all of this is just fiction and the story made up. But knowing R.F. Kuang and watching her own interviews will tell me one thing. R.F. Kuang really meant a lot of things in that book. And she was so brave, by the way, to say the harsh truth that a lot of us know about, but at the same time never got to express it this way. And some people, by the way, when they read this book, when they find it completely new and strange for them, it just opens their eyes to other ideas, stories, and feelings. It's just to think of what others think or believe. Does this have to do with racism? Does it have to do with the political power? Like, who owns power? Who owns control? This is kind of, do you have the right to control other people? Do you have the right to control other countries? Is it actually the goodness in life is what is beneficial to you and the bad is what hurts you? Is that all? I'll be happy for your comments about this book if you want to go ahead with discussion. Thank you so much for being here. Mad Bart says goodbye.